Hello everybody and welcome again to my channel. This time I wanted to make some comments about JW Broadcasting for January 2016. So I watched maybe half of it and I just made some notes on the part that I watched, but I just wanted to bring up some points that I thought were interesting. So at one point, Stephen Lett is doing the podcast this time, or the broadcast, whatever you want to call it, but he talks about the preaching campaign that Jesus started 2,000 years ago that continues to this day. But the funny thing about that is the picture that he had on the screen at the time did not show Jesus knocking on doors, which we all know to be the hallmark of Jehovah's Witnesses' current preaching, but rather it showed Jesus sitting and teaching on a hillside. And the reason this is interesting to me is because if you actually read the scriptural accounts, chances are the apostles and disciples did not primarily go door to door. They oftentimes taught at the temples and in public places first. And then when somebody was interested, that's probably when they went to their house to have a study. So typically speaking, the preaching was not necessarily done by the disciples and the apostles the way it is done by Jehovah's Witnesses. And I just thought that was a fascinating point because the picture on the screen of Jesus was not that of Jesus knocking on doors. Anyways, so another thing I found interesting was he felt the need to expound on an expression that Jehovah used when he said, "This is my son, the beloved, whom I have approved." It's a simple enough saying, but he had to expound upon it to, I guess, put more meaning into it. I guess apparently God is not suitable to say things on his own. It now needs to be explained by the governing body. But also he went on to comment on how how people were responsive to the appeals made by the faithful and discreet slave. The specific appeal he was talking about was the one in May, where they basically asked for more money because they wanted to expedite construction of kingdom halls and translation facilities. Now, there's a couple of interesting things about this. When I was an elder, we got a letter, I believe it was around 2008 or 2009, that we were going to hold off on building kingdom halls because there were not funds available to do such at that time. But a year or so after that, we were able to resume when funds were there. So from that time, the policy has changed, and now they just start asking people for more money. My guess would be that's because the financial situation continues to decline. But also, another thing that's interesting about that is if Armageddon really is as close as they think it is, why do they need to accelerate the building projects? Because after Armageddon, theoretically, people will have nothing to do but build. So why can't they just wait till that point at which there's no financial pressures or time constraints on their building projects? Why is it so important to build things before Armageddon, which should be happening any second now? Could it be because the governing body knows for a fact that any second has been what they've been saying for well over 100 years now? Maybe they're actually starting to look at the clock, or maybe they're subtly admitting to you that they don't actually believe what they're teaching you. So they also talked about the number of Bethelites they support, which is 25,000, I believe they said, and they talked about supporting 55,000 others. They talked about using the money for building Warwick, but just some interesting facts. You can find out from New York newspapers that the amount of money they made selling some of their Brooklyn properties over the last several years amounted to roughly $1 billion. That's billion with a B as in boy. 1 billion. Estimates of building Warwick are that it's going to cost $11 million, which is a small fraction of the amount they got from selling other properties. So let's say that estimate is low. Let's put the estimate at $50 million. Nonetheless, you have a difference between the sale price of the Brooklyn properties and the building price of Warwick of $950 million. So once again, this raises the question of why did they need so much money to build property? Besides which, once again in New York news, you will see that the Watchtower is putting up 2 more of their Brooklyn properties, and it's anticipated to sell for roughly $1 billion more. So they're asking for lots of money, but yet they have assets worth lots of money that they're in the process of liquidating. Okay. So they talked about how they want to expedite Warwick, and they said other large projects, but they didn't specifically mention any. In fact, if you look at the number of branches, I just covered this in a video, at their height they had 118 branches, and now they're down to 89. these translation offices they build really aren't that big compared to what a branch used to be. So you would have to believe that of the branches that have closed, they probably either sold them to the tune of a considerable gain, or they might have converted them to something else. But nonetheless, it leaves the question open about what these other large projects are. The biggest project that they talked about was video presentations at conventions. And from watching the video, it looks like they spent a fair amount of money on this. I am not able to associate a dollar figure with that, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So they talked about 80 video presentations. They talked about building around 2,000 Kingdom Halls, and they showed a picture or video of one of the new style that looks like an office building. And I really believe that is so that if they need to turn around and sell them later, it will be easier, because those office buildings are probably more appealing property investments for potential buyers. And you would also have a wider audience than just religious groups, because all the Kingdom Halls most often probably got sold to other religious groups. And they talk about their various remote translation facilities. I think they said they had 50 of them. But then Stephen Lett does something interesting. He compares the modern Jehovah's Witnesses to the Israelites. He asks the question, were the Israelites more appreciative and responsive? And this to me is funny because the Bible clearly tells us not to compare ourselves to others when we are working for God. So Stephen Lett does not care about scriptural admonition not to compare us to others. In fact, throughout Jehovah's Witnesses literature, you'll always find ways in which you are subtly being compared to others. They'll share stories about somebody with incredible hardships that was able to pioneer or auxiliary pioneer, and the question is implicit, if someone like this can do it, why can't you? Anyways, though, after he compares modern Jehovah's Witnesses to the Israelites, he says that in no way are they less appreciative than the Israelites. But he says that the difference is the Israelites had one project, whereas modern witnesses have more products. Many more projects. So basically, he's letting everyone know that they intend to keep draining their supply of money, and they intend to keep asking for more money because they want to build more things because their buildings are worth money. Anyway, he was talking about how they redirected more funds to the field by laying off, he didn't say this, but one of the things they just did is they discontinued the Special Pioneer program, and Special Pioneers spent a lot of time in field service and they got a stipend from the branch. So I don't know what his version of redirecting funds to the field is, because they just took funds out of the field by laying off the Special Pioneers. And not long before that, they canceled the arrangement of district overseers when they changed things from a district to a region. And district overseers also, I believe, got some type of a stipend, but oftentimes their expenses were paid by wherever they had to be. And he also talked about reducing services at Bethel. So where's all the money going? My guess is it's going into building projects. Maybe some of it went into those video things. But it seems to me that a lot more money is coming in than they're letting on to. And they're trying to increase the amount of money coming in. But of course, since they are opaque, you have no way of knowing what's really going in. And you also have almost no way of knowing what's really going out. So what's happening with the money? I don't know. Then they talked about a Scandinavia branch merge. So one of the branches in Scandinavia was closed and merged with another one. So that accounts for one of your lost branches. And what they want to do is have a big, huge convention in Stockholm so all the Scandinavian friends can get together. And this was interesting. They talked about the logistics and how people were impressed by how organized they were and how most of the people in that particular area didn't believe in God. So the only thing that really impressed them with the witnesses was their ability to be organized. But I found this interesting too, is the stadium manager wanted to hear the singing because you don't get to hear 50,000 people singing at one time usually. And this was interesting to me. If you think about it, it is a powerful thing to hear 50,000 people singing a song. So what this tells you is that the singing at conventions is actually a powerful tool for indoctrination, as well as for mind control. It builds up a strong emotional connection between the people at the convention and that belief. So the bigger the convention, the more powerful the effect, which is why Jehovah's Witnesses like having such big conventions, or at least one of the reasons why they like having conventions. Anyways, though, the biggest thing to take away from that is they were more organized than everybody else, but we know that's because of the extremely rigid authority structure employed by Jehovah's Witnesses. So they were talking also about different conventions around the earth, how they had it in Uganda, and their struggles of getting video screens into rural areas. And they talked about 167 regional conventions in Brazil. Now, I wanted to talk about this for a second because at one point I actually worked in the accounts department at the district conventions at the time, now regional conventions. But they had to trust you an extreme amount to let you work where I did. I worked in what they called the bank, where they counted the money. At the time, our conventions were between 5,500 and 6,000 people, and the regular take from a convention was about $80,000. So after expenses were paid, after the facility was rented to the tune of a couple of grand, after the releases were paid for, which was probably another couple of grand, maybe 10 grand, all the rest of the money went back to the branch. So the branch's take on those conventions was probably in the ballpark of $60,000 on an $80,000 convention, where that much money was collected. Now, does every convention collect that amount of money? I kind of doubt it. But if you think about it, 167 regional conventions probably sending in the tens of thousands of dollars back to their respective branch, that's a lot of money. So everywhere you go, conventions are big money makers for the branch. Then they get back to talking about Warwick, and they stress the point that everybody that works at Warwick is a volunteer, and they're all paying their way. So this should really help you to understand that they're building Warwick for dirt cheap. And they were proud. They interviewed a family, and one of the children was willing to sell his cow so his father could get a plane ticket to go back to Warwick. So this corporation, which makes billions of dollars, or has made over $1 billion and stands to make another $1 billion selling property, is willing to take the cow from a child to pay that father's way so he can go and give his time and energy free to build Warwick. Isn't that truly a loving arrangement by Jehovah? So anyways, there's more things along the lines of that, but they interviewed one guy who's working in Micronesia, and he gave some of his stories showing how Jehovah blessed the building. He was talking about troubles buying concrete, but then Jehovah blessed it. They met the owner of the place and they got their concrete. Another time, they couldn't get sand, and the storm happened and washed a bunch of sand up on the shore, and then all of a sudden they had sand. So Jehovah was doing these things to build the kingdom halls, but for some reason Jehovah didn't protect all the victims of child abuse that you've heard so much about in the news. Those 1,007 children in Australia over 50 years, and who knows how many others throughout the rest of the world. Jehovah won't protect them, but he'll make sure to build the kingdom halls so pedophiles can go there and have the ability to prey on young children. So truly, that's an interesting God that Jehovah is. But nonetheless, all these issues that he attributed to Jehovah, they're just typical construction problems that people usually work through in the course of building a building. Yet he always attributes their overcoming them to Jehovah. But that was about all of that I watched, because I usually can't stomach much more than that. Anyways, those are my thoughts. Thanks for watching.